My wife cheated while I was paying off her student loans, so I sold everything we owned and vanished without leaving a trace behind. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my adult life, I thought love meant sacrifice. When Jenna and I first met, she had this infectious energy, this way of lighting up a room while quietly stressing about how buried she was in student loans. I remember her spilling numbers over coffee one evening, and instead of panicking, I found myself nodding along, promising silently that I'd handle the practical side so she could chase her career dreams. I worked long hours, sometimes double shifts, cutting corners on myself just to make sure bills were paid, rent was covered, and her loans were chipped away month by month. Every little sacrifice felt like proof I was doing the right thing. Proof that love wasn't just about affection, it was about responsibility. Jenna was ambitious, sweet, and endlessly charming. She'd talk about her plans, how she'd finally get promoted, how her ideas would change her department. But she'd always circle back to the debt weighing her down. "I hate asking you for so much," she'd say softly, "but I don't know how I'd make it without you." Her words tugged at something protective in me, and I believed wholeheartedly that this was what marriage was supposed to be. Partnership through thick and thin. I became meticulous with budgeting, noting every dollar spent, cutting luxuries I'd once enjoyed, and even skipping nights out with friends just to save a little more. I convinced myself that if I carried the financial load, our bond would grow stronger, unbreakable in its foundation of trust. Still, there were subtle moments that tugged at the edges of my confidence, like when she'd sigh over a $15 dinner or flinch at a utility bill. But she always reassured me it was temporary, that we'd be through it soon. I remember the nights lying awake after paying another chunk of her loans, feeling exhausted but proud. I told myself that responsibility wasn't a burden. It was proof of my love, my commitment, my ability to protect the life we were building together. Little did I know, what I thought was loyalty was just the first layer of a much bigger story, one that would slowly unravel everything I believed about love, trust, and sacrifice. Things started to feel different a few months in, though I didn't want to admit it. Jenna began getting protective of her phone in ways that felt off, not in a joking, surprise kind of way, but tense, like I wasn't supposed to see who she was texting or calling. "It's just work stuff," she said every time I asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust her completely. After all, trust was part of what I thought made a marriage strong, right? I kept picking up extra shifts to cover bills, buy groceries, and chip away at her loans faster, thinking the more I gave, the more secure our life would be. But nights were starting to get longer, quiet, empty, filled with the hum of the apartment and my thoughts. I'd notice her schedule shifting unpredictably. Late nights at work, sudden weekend trips she insisted were professional obligations. I tried not to feel suspicious. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe the pressure of her debt and her ambition was just changing her. Our conversation started carrying little jabs about money that made me wince. "Are you really sure we need to eat out tonight?" she asked once, staring at the menu like it was a moral dilemma. Another time, she sighed over a $7 coffee, and I could feel my chest tighten, but I just nodded. I convinced myself that these small tensions were temporary, like cracks in paint, nothing structural. Still, I noticed how tired I felt at the end of each day, my body buzzing from exhaustion, while my mind raced through every cent spent, every bill paid, every student loan payment I'd covered. And yet, beneath the fatigue, there was a strange pride. I was keeping us afloat, ensuring our future, and wasn't that exactly what love demanded? Maybe these small frictions were just part of marriage. Maybe loyalty, my loyalty, was enough to keep it all together. But deep down, a tiny nagging voice whispered, what if being enough wasn't the same as being seen? It wasn't a sudden revelation, more like a slow, creeping unease that I couldn't shake. One night, I noticed her phone buzz while she was in the kitchen, and without thinking, I glimpsed the screen. There it was, a string of messages that made my stomach twist. Someone named Alex. The tone was familiar, flirty, and way too intimate for what I thought was just a work friend. My hand shook, and I looked up, trying to mask what I'd seen. It's nothing, just a colleague, she said quickly, snapping the phone closed and forcing that same smile she always used to calm me down. But this time, I couldn't convince myself it was nothing. The next few days were tense. I'd catch glimpses of her whispering into her phone, laughing softly, locking her laptop whenever I came near. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that trust was about giving space, that maybe I was just tired from work. But something had changed. Our home, once warm with shared plans and quiet laughter, now felt heavy, like we were orbiting different worlds in the same apartment. I doubled down on my work, picking up every extra shift I could, trying to ignore the gnawing pit in my chest. Each paycheck went to bills, groceries, student loans, everything. And I told myself it was an act of love. I kept telling friends, she's stressed, I just have to support her. They nodded, unaware that every late-night text, every secretive glance, was slowly eroding the foundation I thought was unshakable. Then there were the little signs she didn't notice I noticed. The scent of someone else's cologne lingering faintly. The change in her laughter when she talked on the phone. The way she'd avoid eye contact during what she called work calls. I felt like I was losing her. And more than that, I was losing myself in the process of trying to hold us together. And yet, I still clung to the hope that my sacrifices, my loyalty, would be enough. That hope, I realized, might be the very thing keeping me blind to what was really happening. By this point, I was drowning in numbers and deadlines, but not the work kind, the emotional kind. Every month, I poured everything I had into paying her bills, covering groceries, and chipping away at her student loans, all while she hinted at wanting a better lifestyle. It wasn't just about financial pressure anymore. It was the subtle way she made me feel guilty for not giving enough, as if my sacrifices were always insufficient. One evening, as I counted yet another stack of receipts, she looked at me with that half smile and said, I just wish you'd relax more. You stress too much over money. I blinked, momentarily speechless, because here I was, exhausted, fraying at the edges, and all I wanted was acknowledgement, not a lecture. Then came the little luxuries I hadn't noticed before. New clothes in her closet that weren't there yesterday, a dinner receipt from a fancy restaurant I didn't remember us planning, and that soft scent on her skin that wasn't mine. I started logging every dollar spent, tracking every bill, trying to make sense of it. Each day, the tension in the apartment grew heavier, thick like humidity on a summer night. Our conversations, once filled with shared dreams and plans, now revolved around budgets, bills, and the ever-present weight of her loans. Arguments started erupting over the smallest things. Do we really need takeout again? She asked sharply one night, while I was trying to heat up the leftovers I'd carefully budgeted for. Her voice carried that undercurrent of frustration, not with the situation, but with me. My stomach churned, a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion, because all I'd done was try to make life easier for both of us. Despite it all, I told myself it was temporary. Maybe this was the price of supporting someone I loved, of building a life together. Yet, as I lay awake that night, listening to the hum of the city outside our window, a quiet dread settled in. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cracks were deeper than I wanted to admit, and that maybe, just maybe, I was clinging to a life that was already slipping through my fingers. I'll never forget the day I found out. It wasn't some dramatic reveal with shouting or a confrontation. It was quiet, almost sinister in its subtlety. I was doing laundry and noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out from under a stack of bills. At first, I thought it was just another receipt, another late notice. But when I unfolded it, my heart sank. It wasn't a bill. It was a hotel reservation for two, under her name, dated months ago. And next to it, scribbled in familiar handwriting, was a note that made my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you tonight. You make everything worth it. I froze. For what felt like hours, I just stared at that paper, my mind racing. Jenna walked in behind me, humming, completely unaware of the evidence sitting in my hands. "Hey, what are you looking at?" she asked casually, and I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. She smiled, sweetly, innocently, and said, "Just bills, right? Don't worry about them. I've got it handled." That smile, the one I had once trusted completely, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. All the late nights, all the overtime, all the careful budgeting, it had been for nothing. My sacrifices, my loyalty, my trust, they weren't just unappreciated. They were exploited. The person I loved, the person I thought shared my dreams and values, had been living a secret life while I carried the weight of both our worlds. The apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage, every corner whispering betrayal. I didn't know whether to confront her, to yell, to leave, or just crumble in silence. For the first time, I realized that my belief in love as sacrifice had blinded me to reality. The foundation I thought was unbreakable was built on lies, and I was standing in the rubble. And yet, even in that moment of gutting despair, a part of me started to shift, quietly, dangerously, thinking, maybe it's time I stop sacrificing everything for someone who doesn't deserve it. The next evening, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I waited until she got home from work, the apartment smelling faintly of her perfume, the hum of the fridge louder than usual, filling the silence between us. I stood by the counter, the hotel reservation clutched in my hand like a grenade, and when she walked in, I forced myself to meet her gaze. "Jenna, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. She froze mid-step, that sweet smile faltering for just a second. "Talk about what?" she asked, tilting her head, casual, almost too casual. My chest tightened. "I found this," I said, holding the paper up. "Do you want to explain why you've been seeing someone else while I've been paying off your loans?" Her reaction wasn't shock or guilt, it was deflection. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, stepping closer, voice soft. "You're overreacting. It's just a silly misunderstanding, really." But there was a tremor in her hand, the kind that betrays someone trying too hard to be convincing. "Overreacting?" I snapped. "I've been giving everything I have, my nights, my money, my sanity, and you've been lying behind my back?" She sighed, frustration creeping in now, her eyes rolling slightly. "You always make everything so dramatic. I can't deal with this right now," she muttered, retreating to the bedroom. I followed, heart pounding, every beat echoing the betrayal I felt. I tried to reason with her, pleading, questioning, but it was like talking to a stranger, someone skilled at twisting words, making me doubt my own judgment. By the end of the night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the apartment quiet except for the ticking clock, feeling hollow, exhausted, and furious all at once. I realized that confrontation had changed nothing. If anything, It had made the air between us poisonous, the trust irreparably broken. I wanted answers. I wanted closure. But what I got instead was manipulation, excuses, and the cold reminder that I'd been fighting a war alone. And in that silence, I began to feel a dangerous clarity. If love couldn't be mutual, maybe it was time I started thinking about myself. After that night, I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal while the person I trusted most had been living a double life. I started thinking about disappearing, not in some dramatic, angry way, but clean, precise, leaving nothing behind for her or anyone else to track. Every day, I mapped it out in my head, a careful checklist of what had to go, what needed to be sold, and what evidence of me had to vanish. The thought made my chest pound, equal parts fear and adrenaline. But for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of control. I began liquidating assets in secret. The car we bought together, the furniture we painstakingly picked out, even small electronics I could easily replace later. Each sale felt like a tiny rebellion, a reclaiming of the life she had quietly stolen from me. At night, I sat in our apartment, counting cash and making lists, listening to the hum of the city outside the window, imagining myself driving far away, erasing every trace of my existence. Her texts started pouring in, innocent questions at first. Where are you? Did you forget something? But quickly escalated to panic, though she had no idea how meticulously I was covering my tracks. I didn't respond. I refused to get caught in the web of her manipulation again. I was quiet, calculating, patient, and every movement was deliberate. The more I planned, the more clarity I gained about everything she had taken from me, my trust, my peace, my sense of worth. The apartment, once a home, now felt like a cage that had been built around my naivety. I could almost feel the weight lifting from my shoulders as I imagined locking the door behind me for the last time. By the time the weekend came, I was ready. Every detail accounted for, every loose end tied, and the thrill of finally reclaiming myself coursing through my veins. All that remained was one final night under the same roof, one last chance to feel the air before disappearing completely. And as I packed the last of my essentials, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at once. Once I left, there would be no turning back. The morning I left, I moved like a ghost through our apartment, checking everything twice. I closed joint accounts, canceled subscriptions, and quietly removed every trace of myself from shared utilities and services. Each step was methodical. No rash moves, no dramatic goodbyes, just a clean severing of every tether that could lead her to me. The air felt heavy with tension, but there was also a strange calm, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I packed only the essentials, a duffel bag with clothes, some cash, important documents, and a few personal items I couldn't bear to part with. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and her perfume, memories layered into the very walls, and I felt a pang of sorrow mixed with determination. Her texts started blowing up my phone, frantic now. Where are you? Answer me. This isn't funny. But I didn't reply. I couldn't. Each unanswered message was a small act of reclaiming the power she had stripped from me over months of lies. As I walked through the hallway one last time, I paused, listening to the subtle creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of traffic outside. It felt surreal, like I was stepping out of one life and into another, leaving everything familiar behind. My heart was pounding, a mix of fear and liberation, and I realized how heavy the emotional baggage had been, how much I'd carried silently. I double-checked the locks, leaving no hint that anyone had been here. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of control, a quiet triumph over betrayal. The apartment that had once been a home now looks like a museum of my past self, and I was walking away, finally untethered. And as I slid into my car, the city waking up around me, a single thought crystallized. There was no going back. Once I vanished, it would be a clean slate, but I knew the echoes of her betrayal would follow me, haunting me in ways I hadn't yet understood. The moment I started driving away, the weight of months lifted from my shoulders, but the fear didn't disappear. It followed me like a shadow. I kept the route quiet, avoiding familiar roads, changing phones, and leaving no digital breadcrumbs behind. Every turn, every mile, felt like peeling away layers of a life that had become suffocating. The city behind me blurred into a haze of early morning light and passing cars, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I abandoned our car at a safe location, using the cash I'd saved for months to rent a cheap vehicle in a new town. Each small decision, every careful calculation, added to this feeling of empowerment. The apartment, the bills, the constant manipulation, it was all fading behind me, and yet the adrenaline made my heart race in a way I hadn't felt since I first realized the betrayal. At night, I slept in a modest motel room, the hum of the air conditioner and distant city sounds, replacing the quiet tension of my old apartment. I let myself breathe, finally allowing the panic and heartbreak to surface. I thought about all the sleepless nights I'd spent budgeting, worrying, sacrificing, and how none of it had mattered to her. But now, alone in this small, unfamiliar space, I felt the first flicker of peace. I began imagining a life rebuilt from scratch. New routines, new surroundings, a future where I wasn't a servant to someone else's deception. The thought made me giddy, a dangerous mix of fear and excitement coursing through my veins. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, I wasn't running from responsibility. I was running towards something of my own making. Yet even in this newfound freedom, a small, nagging voice reminded me of the chaos I left behind. Jenna would discover the apartment empty, panic, question friends, family, maybe even authorities. And I knew one thing for certain. She would never see it coming, and by the time she did, I'd already be gone, untouchable, and finally, in control. I stayed off the grid for a while, but curiosity gnawed at me. Through carefully created accounts and anonymous tips, I started to hear whispers of what was happening back home. Jenna was panicking, calling friends, family, even coworkers, desperately trying to figure out where I had gone. She didn't know I was watching from afar, unseen, untouchable, and the satisfaction, quiet and steady, was almost intoxicating. Friends and family began piecing it together. The apartment was empty, her phone messages went unanswered, and the bills she thought I'd cover were suddenly past due. There were hushed conversations, frustrated texts, and the awkward, whispered confessions of people who never realized how fragile her perfect image had been. And I watched it all, invisible, knowing that the chaos she was experiencing was the direct result of her own actions. Every new detail I heard added to a strange sense of vindication. The life she'd manipulated me into sustaining was unraveling before her eyes. I knew she was facing judgment, not just from others, but from herself, and it was almost poetic. All those months of deception, the secret meetings, the lies, it was catching up with her. I felt no gloating in the usual sense. It wasn't cruelty I wanted, but justice. Watching her struggle from a distance, knowing I'd taken back control of my life, was oddly comforting. I could finally breathe without the constant weight of betrayal pressing on my chest, the fear of being manipulated again slowly lifting. And yet, even in this relief, there was a lingering awareness. Her attempts to find me were futile. She would rage, search, panic, and perhaps even try to apologize, but it would never reach me. I had vanished completely, leaving only echoes of my existence behind, and the knowledge that I had taken back everything she tried to steal. Even after escaping, I couldn't completely silence the memories. Some nights, the loneliness hit harder than the betrayal ever had. I'd sit in a cheap motel or a small rented apartment, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, and replay every moment. The way Jenna smiled while lying, the late nights I spent covering her debts, the subtle jabs she threw when I tried to speak up. I realized how much of myself I had given away, how long I had ignored my own needs in the name of love. The exhaustion, heartbreak, and disillusionment washed over me in waves that left me feeling hollow, like I'd been emptied of everything that once made me feel whole. I started writing it all down, pouring my anger, sorrow, and disbelief onto paper. Words became a release, a way to untangle the knots of grief and manipulation that had bound me for months. I relived the worst nights, the moments I'd almost given up on myself entirely, and allowed the emotion to hit me fully without restraint. For the first time, I acknowledged the depth of my pain, and in doing so, I found a strange sense of relief. In quiet reflection, I understood the truth I hadn't seen before. Loyalty and sacrifice only matter when they're mutual. When love is one-sided, it's not love. It's a cage. And I had been living in that cage for far too long. There was anger, yes, but also clarity. I was no longer the man she could manipulate or break. I was rebuilding from scratch, stronger, wiser, and armed with the lessons of betrayal. And yet, even in this slow moment, a spark of something else emerged. Hope. The hope that life could be reclaimed, that trust could be rebuilt with people who valued me, and that freedom wasn't just about running away, but about finally choosing myself. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning how to live again. Months later, I finally settled into a life that felt entirely my own. A small apartment in a quiet town, a job I actually enjoyed, and routines I had chosen for myself. No one else's debts, expectations, or lies dictating my every move. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was more than that. It was proof that I could rebuild, that I could reclaim the parts of myself I'd lost to manipulation and betrayal. I walked streets I'd never known, breathed air that felt lighter, and for the first time in years, I laughed without a shadow of guilt or exhaustion trailing behind me. I never reached out to Jenna. I didn't need closure from her. The closure had come from within. Watching her scramble from a distance, knowing I was untouchable and completely gone, brought a quiet satisfaction that no confrontation ever could. She had built her world on lies and deceit, and I had chosen to rise above it. I could feel the empowerment radiating in small moments, paying my own bills without anxiety, sleeping without dread, eating without guilt. Each choice was a brick in the foundation of the life I was finally building for myself. And in the quiet moments, I reflected on everything I'd endured. Betrayal had tried to define me. Financial strain had tried to break me. Manipulation had tried to blind me. But none of it had won. I had taken back control, and in doing so, I had learned the most important lesson. My worth isn't measured by what I sacrifice for others. It's measured by what I refuse to compromise when it comes to my own life. I even found a way to give back in small, meaningful ways, helping someone I knew in passing who was trapped in a toxic relationship like I had been, anonymously guiding them toward their own freedom. And every time I did, I felt the weight of the past lift a little more. Sitting on my balcony one evening, the city lights stretching below me, I whispered to myself, almost as if it needed saying aloud. Sometimes, vanishing is the only way to truly be free. And this time, it was true. I was free, whole, and finally untethered.